So one of the first people I came to was Dr. Sen to say, listen, I'm thinking of kicking this off. And he was not skeptical at all. He's like, go for it. This is what you need. And we talked to a lot of people about the ethics. How do you commission content? How do you tell stories? What are some of the red flags and red lines? So I'm very, very moved to have you both here today and to be part of this. Thank you so much. And I was hoping for easy questions, but we will see. Dr. Shelja.
No, I think I love this book so much. And I have read your earlier books too and derived so much from each. And this one was very different in a sense because I think this is an intersection between two things I feel very passionate about. Stories, and also mental health. And I think the way you have weaved the narrative, the fascinating narrative of these amazing characters across generations, and so many important, significant, relevant themes for our times, And I'm going to cover a lot of these through my questions. It could be, I think one of the main ones is for me is childhood. Like for us, we work with children and young people in the community, in schools, in their homes, in public spaces. It's about childhood. It's about belonging. It's about love. It's about children who are left behind, children who are invisible, children who are about seeing, right? It's about grief. It's about building community. It's about how certain things, which is my perspective I'm bringing here, certain things which are sometimes we put as a label of mental health, difficulties, pathologized or given a diagnosis or a label. But they're basically people's way of responding to life's struggles. Even from, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but even for the main character, Maya, how whatever the struggles she was going through were her ways of responding to what had happened to her, what was happening to her on a day-to-day basis, the adversities, the hardships, the abuse, the trauma she had been through. So a lot of questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm ready. I'm bracing.
Yeah. So, I'm going to just read out some bits. I'm a nerd, so I make notes. So I like to read lots and lots of notes. To start with something that Maya said that stays with me. And she says there's something about being unwanted as a child that fractures the soul. Yeah, and it's just, I remember at that time I had to pause. Maya's the main character. And she's talking about her childhood. And Maya's convinced she's inherently unlovable, including by her own mother. Her childhood abandonment left the deepest of scars, even though surviving that experience had set up to deal with the worst life had to offer. Right? She regularly spent up to 3 to 4 hours in a park near school, sitting on a bench. And this again stayed with me. So many children talk about how they leave school and they don't go home and sit in find a park on a bench for hours. And nobody has an idea where they are, and nobody's even bothered where they are. Nobody knows that they've got out from the bus, and they've gone to the bench and they're sitting there. So that, and then she would make friends with anyone, craving that absolute deep sense of belonging that came so naturally to some people. She never wanted to be on the outside again. So these things that I'm picking up, the theme of love, of belonging, of safety, of family, that we take so much for granted in our lives, how crucial it is. So I just want to understand your perspective on Maya and this particular theme that I'm thinking of.
Thank you. That's a really powerful sort of summary of that theme. I think that it was interesting for me to see Maya grow up. And this is the weird thing that happens when you create your characters. And then, it's a work of fiction. Is if you do justice to them, they kind of show you the way. But in her case, I knew already the foundation is pretty cracked, for lack of a better word. One of the ways this book started, that came to me were a couple of scenes that included Maya, included Akira, and included her mother. And the mother, the character, when I started out writing this, the mother was really the bad guy. There was like this mother has abandoned this child. The first few drafts, it was very black and white. Like, this has ruined this child, this Maya's childhood. And then she's grown up, and of course her friends, and they're pushing 30. Her friends are kind of like, it's time to snap out of this, get over this. But I think if you don't address some of those foundational cracks, if you don't have the opportunity, or you don't have access to a safe space, if you don't have children first, you don't have people to talk to, who won't judge you, I think those cracks just splinter. You can hide them for a long time, but they do splinter. I will say my mother fought her way back into the story. She's not, she has her own redemptive arc, but it made me really think about the pressure we put on, ourselves, not just as adults, but the pressure we put on kids to belong. And I think all of you who have been children or have children know how brutally honest children are. So in the school that she is, the little snatches you get of her school life, you realize she's kind of been singled out for being weird because, that's the one whose mother ran away. That's the one whose father adopted her. An IPS officer, by the way, adopts her. And because there's no conversation around these things, and I'll end this thought for here, but I think families, when they're trying to protect, they can also make things worse by just saying, okay, let's not talk about it. We don't want to trouble the child further.
Yeah.
But that silence has its, takes its own toll, because then there's nowhere for that, that those feelings to go.
Yeah. What I see here is some of the intricacies of a therapist who, who's able to understand these nuances in people or tries to understand. You've been able to highlight that so well.
I think that's my journalistic training in asking Dr. Sen and Dr. Golik now 3,000 questions. But I'm so happy. I feel like I passed a test check on it. That's what I'm saying. I think that it's also hard to do this, what you've just done, read it with that much care. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Asking, because that's such another very important thread in the book in place. It is brief about, of course, Maya's loss of a mother, who just comes in, Maya's loss of a father, and where and she says when in the book, you right, grief lives in the body. Someone told her as an adult, but the younger Maya had no clue how to cope. How could anyone have even said back then? Everyone had expected her to just move on. But how? There was no guide. There was no guide even. Right? So, trauma of abandonment and losing a parent so young.
I don't think that I would have really understood some of the nuances of grief if I hadn't been writing this after meeting her. Like the manuscript had started, but the story really, only in retrospect I realize, it has a lot of the imprint that my journey with grief had. So someone did tell me that grief lives in the body, and I think it's a famous person who says that. And I was just thinking, my brother was much younger, of course, when my father passed away, so he was about 25, but it struck me that I had actually created this character who's lost a parent at a very young age. And I'm like, it impacts you so much when you're an adult. Like, I can't even imagine what would be happening as a child, except to say that I know a lot of these cliches get bandied about, So this is one of those areas where I think the real life kind of, seeps in subconsciously into the writing, which is that people will tend to say you have to be strong now, or they tell a little boy that you have to be the man of the house now. You have to take care of your mother, and you have to move on. That as if there's a timeline, So I think that without some of the lived understanding, I wouldn't have really been able to impress upon. But it also speaks to, the fact that she does see herself. And this is probably something I've learned through the work over the years. She, as an adult, has a bit of, she has very strong defense mechanisms clearly, but she also sees herself as very passive recipient of all the things that are happening. It's kind of only when she starts, realizing she has more control, or before everyone starts crying and thinking this is a super depressing book. I want to say that a lot of people who love in this book, and like with real life, you sometimes don't notice the people who are there. So for her, that is, recognizing that Gautam, her brother, is actually there. He's a phone call away. He's been there from childhood, not sure how to cope with what's happening, but trying to be there for her. in any case as a child. And of course, we realize later he's also gone through, you see it from her perspective. You don't think, oh, damn, he's also lost his father. And I do think with grief, it's one of those things that nobody can really, there's nothing you can say to someone. And I think it's how we choose to be. Do we let people have that space? Do we let people say those uncomfortable things? And I think even as adults, we struggle with that. Like that's just, we're not wired to, we're not conditioned to deal with these things. And it makes us all very uncomfortable. I mean, death makes us uncomfortable. Talking about death. Obviously, in a family, you won't be going around telling people like, oh my God, you're going to die. But I do think sometimes we should have a vocabulary or access to some sort of vocabulary resources, to make this. But that's a whole different topic. And I promise the book is very hopeful.
I'm going to come to that. How the book starts with an idea, then you start building on it, and then you start building narratives.
This book actually came to me with a couple of the characters and the scene. So I knew always it's going to start with Maya posting on social. Because I'm very fascinated with how we perform on social media all the time. And she wouldn't even want to go off and have a breakdown without letting people know that she's doing something. It's very performative. So that scene was there. And then the two characters of Akira and the mother had actually come to me as with sketches. So I think for me, it's usually like scene first and then I build out. The first sort of plot line is literally of the friends starting to panic about her going missing. Yes. But, it just does strike me that many of us who were pre-digital, when you'd be worried about your friends, you would actually probably pick up the phone, if not land up at the house. Here, you kind of just forced and you're like, you just presume things are going to be that way. And they quickly spiral because that's just the nature of, how social media works.
That love to dig that a little further about social media. I'll put social media spirituality. They're different things. Very different things. But, so as a person, of course, social media gives access to, she uses to connect, to find her tribe in some ways. But even her, and I'm just kind of thinking that what is so fascinating about social media is that through social media we get to be seen. When you are invisible, then you're not seen. That's the way you got seen, but I think you put it very well that you makes people more exposed but less seen. More social superficially, but actually more social. Unable to connect beyond the surface. Right? So all these paradoxes of social media, but very important aspect of social media is the sense of being seen and belonging. Right? And I'm also thinking that when Maya goes into spirituality, it's something very similar. Right? She wants to find her people. She wants to belong. She wants a community. Right? I don't know what made you think about that spiritual angle. And
I think, in a country like ours, I think it's almost a given that people have some sort of idea of spirituality, whether they believe or don't believe. But there's something in the, air or water that may not be there in the US, as we have seen clearly today. But I wanted to show Maya's quest a little bit different from, so her brother goes off on an actual spiritual journey. But in Maya's case, because she's looking for a quick fix in a way, because it's kind of that social media, you're right, it allows us to be seen, it allows us to feel connected. And that connection can often be very superficial, but it plugs, it gives you that hit of dopamine or whatever it is, and you feel good. But then you have to keep chasing that. What she's realized at this point in the story is that her friends aren't getting her, and she's not able to, she's feeling stuck. And somebody takes her, and it's actually like somebody that ad agency takes her to an ashram, and she goes for a satsang, and she feels this is it. And there is something about these kind of spaces sometimes that you feel very, moved. Like, yeah. But unfortunately for her, because I think I threw everything at her in this book, she has found a fraud, a charlatan.
Found
the crime.
Yeah.
She's not found the good guy. There's a good guy, I promise. But she's found the guy who's, I feel very bad for Maya. If you ever met me, I don't think you're gonna like me as much as the rest of you do. But she's found the guy who has a whole business model around this. So it's literally like, okay, come in, that's great. Okay, I see you. Okay, well, if you we upsell them a little bit. You're going to be fast tracked to the spiritual salvation. And I think that's very real and that does happen because nowadays everything is like, it's a click away or how much do you pay? And if I pay more, do I get to meet with the guru, right?
What's in the facade?
Yeah, this is the conspiracy theory that the Prasad has been drugged. But a lot of these things, by the way, have seeped in from real life. Like there must have been one news item somewhere about something, and this is then built up. But for me, I think it was important for Maya's journey because she's just searching, and I think you realize how desperate she is to find a place where she belongs, and she doesn't find that sense of belonging until she meets this person at that ashram.
Yeah.
And, I was on a podcast and they were saying that, her friends are just not serving her. Like, she should have just left them. And I was like, that would have been half the plot, I think. The book would have been much shorter. But she is. And I think we do sometimes outgrow our friends. We do also, as we evolve, and you realize she's spending more time on her own journey than she probably has ever before. She's spending more time with herself, with her own thoughts, because she's cut off. And she's realizing that she's missing something and she's not sure where to go for it, right? Like, it's not at the click of a button. It doesn't end up being a ashram. Yeah, it was not in that last relationship.
Even in her relationship with Roy, again, right? Worried that she was not measuring up. She tried harder.
Yeah.
Always at not measuring up. Which is something we live with in our present day world, especially children live with, young people live with, not being good enough, not being worthy enough, and that they have to fit in certain standards of beauty, of academic success, worthiness. There's a particular mold they have to fit in, and otherwise you have to keep seeking it.
Yeah.
Even friendships have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Every post has to be perfect. So, the struggles of a young person, I think, for me, I found very fascinating. The last question I'm going to bring up is, because you end with hope. And sometimes we have to walk an awful long way to find our way back home. We talk about stories, stories give us hope. Our stories show us our humanity and the significance of, in mental health, the voice of people with lived experiences and how important that is. So,
I think that, like you, I'm a nerd. So I think for me, when I was younger, for sure, I feel like stories saved me a lot of times when there may not have been people to talk to in a certain way. And I far from, the only one. I think stories are critical. And I think all journalists I know understand the power essentially of a story, and not just a story, but a person with a story. I think even before we knew this, that the global movement has shifted away from biopsychosocial to lived experience expertise. Because I come from a journalistic background, I understood the importance of letting people tell their story, like Dr. Sen was saying, finding people who would share, and it was much harder, I think, earlier to find people who would share openly. Our first stories were on the Health Collective were anonymous and under pseudonyms, and then slowly people started coming out to share more. But this book, I didn't want to write as a mental health treatise. It's not like my take, on the world of mental health. I think clearly the stories I've heard or the work I've done may have given me quite a foundation, and some of the obviously my worldview will be quite evident. Like most books, you'll get a sense of my worldview. But I think that when I speak to people who've been through hard times, and again, as I keep promising my mom to say, whenever I do anything in mental health, I'm not a therapist. I'm a journalist. I'm a storyteller. But the one thing that comes, across is that often we're not talking to lay people like us for a solution. They're not talking like, they might not want to give me a diagnosis. They don't want me to give them a diagnosis, or do you think I'm like this? They just want me to listen, right? And I think that for Maya and her friends, and certainly her brother, by the end of this, poor chap, he also has gone through his own drama. You realize how important that safe harbor is. And I think that we talk a lot about safe spaces, and, even that has become, jargon nowadays. But the fundamental thing we need to do for our families, for our friends, for our loved ones is just to be there. Sometimes just show up. And show up when things are difficult. Show up when you feel awkward. And I know this, from the sort of bereavement period, when I actually didn't want to meet any of my friends. But I realize also that people find that so uncomfortable. They're like, I don't want to send a message because I don't know, I don't want to trouble her. And, now we have friends who are like, listen, just send a message.
Yes.
Say there's no pressure on you to respond. Or show up with food.
Yeah.
Some people do that really well. They'll show up and show care, and I think that if there's anything, that this book leaves people with that idea that there is hope, that you're not alone, I would be very, very pleased. But I feel like stories should make you feel like you're being held or seen, or.
There's a coming together of things, right? At the end. Yeah.
But it's also very weird. I did ask you, and you said you're a fan of weird fiction. So we should warn people it gets super, super weird. So glad.